That's CPD Show. Well, my name is Chris Bright and I'll be your host for today. And today I'm joined on the island by Nick Hughes. Nick is the senior pastor at Emmanuel Gateway Church in Lewisham in London, having previously worked as the associate pastor at Bethel, London's Riverside Church from 1999 to 2012. Nick is also AoG GB's area lead for the Southeast. Nick is married to Debbie, who's in ministry with Nick, and Nick has 3 children and 3 grandchildren. Nick, it is great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Come on. Thank you very much, Chris, for inviting me. It's great to be here. So, I'm just really excited about sharing some of this information you've asked me to share with you today. So, it'll be brilliant.
Brilliant. Yes, well, excellent. And no more excitement I can imagine than talking about dessert, because it's very important, I think, dessert. And
absolutely.
What better way to talk about development than to first talk about dessert? So would you like to tell me about what's your favorite dessert?
Yeah, so I love this segue into getting me to talk about other stuff. And for me, puddings are a big deal. And there's a great story behind that. But my favorite dessert then is something called Apple Betty. Has to be made by my mum, so it's exclusive. And if people want to know what that's about, never come across it, it's sometimes confused with the crumble. It's not a crumble, okay? Slightly different ingredients. The apples are the same, but and the way it's made, it's kind of layers of biscuit, shortbread biscuit, layered with fruit and then baked. And then it has to be served with very thick custard. That's how I've been brought up, and I'm afraid that's how it's going to be. Yeah, love it. Very sweet. Not allowed to have any more of that because I'm trying to lose weight. And but that's the big thing that I have to resist. So.
Fair enough. So right, Apple Betty. So it's not a crumble. So is the biscuit on the top or is it on the bottom? How does that?
It's layered. So you start at the bottom, then you layer some, in this case, apple, and then another layer of biscuit, and it's layered, and then it's crunched off with like a crumble biscuit on the top. Yeah.
So it's somewhere between a crumble and a lasagna.
Exactly right. It's exactly what I would have called it. Yeah. Yeah, like an apple lasagna. Yeah, very much so. and it's very tasty.
It absolutely sounds tasty. Perfect kind of Sunday afternoon kind of desserts for certain. And the custard, thick custard. So we've had lots of different people that have talked about custard with a lot of passion on this podcast. Now, is there a specific brand that you go for? Are you sort of Ambrosia, Birds? I know have been mentioned. What would be the one that you go for?
Well, the traditional one that my mum makes is the Birds made with the powder, not from the tin.
Right.
The only one that competes for that for me today is Waitrose's Madagascan vanilla custard. I mean, that's the deal. But I remember when my granddad was alive, we do Sunday dinner, he would comment on the thickness of custard, and he uses this phrase, it needs to stick to your ribs. And I've never forgotten that, and think, that about sums up the consistency of the custard, unless it's the Madagascan vanilla. So.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the Madagascan vanilla. It is. I think a lot of the supermarkets are doing it, but I mean, it sounds like Waitrose. If you're going to go for a Waitrose one, you're going to another echelon, really. There.
Yeah, that's right.
Brilliant. Well, that's it. So Apple Betty with custard that sticks to your ribs. So I'll put that down. That sounds like an absolutely great dessert. So excellent. All right. Well, you've got 3 resources with you today. And we'll go through them one by one. Should we talk about your first resource? What's the first one that you got?
Sure. So this is a book that's quite old now, but was kind of a bestseller back in the sort of the early 2000s. It's called Soul Survivor by the author Philip Yancey. And it's really a collection of essays rather than a biographical or instructional. Just that almost was, I think, a cathartic process for Phil Yancey to really journey an authentic faith, having been brought up in a fairly strict fundamentalist context and struggling with some of the things he'd been taught as a young person, and then thinking through his faith and seeing this sort of disconnect with, how does that work in life? And he wrote that book, it really inquiring other authors, other people's lives, Christians mainly, but not exclusively, agent changers that help him process that. And I think one of the things that was intriguing is when I read I think it was this book, Introduction. He describes himself as a reluctant Christian, and I just love that honesty about faith and trying to sort of ground and anchor the reality of what Christianity means in a very real world, not somehow disassociating reality and having a spiritual corner on one side. He really has done the work, and that impacted and shaped a lot of how I approach preaching and teaching and my life, really.
It's one of those things that, everyone that's kind of grown up in Christianity tends to go through a point in their life where they start to question what they believe and what they really think about it. And, seems like for Yancey, growing up in a very kind of fundamentalist background, he had to rethink that through. What were some of the conclusions that maybe, or some of the issues that he had to wrestle through? And maybe has that been similar for you as well?
Yeah, I think for me, faith's a thing. I think I've always been secure in my faith. It's more about I grew up just in Assemblies of God, born and bred, love it, and through, a Pentecostal. But I think some of my questions came through ecumenism. How does the church relate to this? So I think at the time, certainly, I was beginning to say, well, look, how are some of these other expressions of Christianity engaging with the world? And how do we treat people from different contexts, ethnicities, faith? We can't just discount them and say, well, that's it. If they don't believe, they're going to hell. And I know a fundamentalist line, that's the line. But how do we engage with that? And I think for Philip Yancey, it seems to me that he broadened the picture to say, no, the gospel is shed in so many practical ways. So, for example, he talks about one of his good friends, Philip Brands, who was a missionary, a medical missionary into India. And because of his faith, developed a pioneering treatment for leprosy. And they set up some amazing clinics. And I thought, see, that's preaching in practice right there. It began to shape me with some of the things that he said. He introduced me to Fred Buckner, who's considered to be one of the best sort of Christian writers of our time, who just began to broaden out the aspects of my faith from a narrow line. And it's not, I've always just known God. It's just trying to really square some of the teachings that I'd embraced as a young person to say, no, but what about these people? What about these people? I remember thinking, I was on holiday one year, and we developed as a kid with my parents, and we developed this sort of camaraderie with caravanning. So the caravan people around us became friends for 2 weeks. And they became really good friends, so much so that after the holiday, we stayed friends. And there was a couple there who were Jehovah's Witnesses. And I remember reflecting and thinking, gosh, if they never turn to Jesus, those people, my faith will tell me that, that they're going to be out of heaven forever. How does that work? Now, I'm not advocating that it's changed my belief system, but it just put this, how do we reach these kinds of people then? What is it? What is a demonstration of our faith that draws people rather than just draws lines and creates tribes? And I think that's what Phil Yancey seemed to begin to struggle with. And just reading around some of the authors helped me process some of that and put me on a journey, really, of thinking a bit more broadly.
Yeah, I think it's something that everyone really needs to go through at some point, really thinking that through and thinking, what do I believe on specific topics? And that can also mean, investigating other areas of Christianity and learning things from those kind of things. I think for me personally, seeing the breadth of opinion within Christianity has actually been really a strengthening thing for me, to be able to see that actually, there's a lot of different views on specific subjects, and actually it all sits within this, the wide field of what I call orthodoxy, and actually it means that it's not so rigid, and you can grow and have a much more of an expansive faith, and actually appreciate the stream that we're in. Because actually you can really think through, why am I a Pentecostal, and how did I come to believe that, and actually have a real appreciation for for that by looking at, okay, let's have a look at the alternatives, and let's have a look at the other areas. So I think it's something that's really worth doing, and a good. I think a book like this can certainly do it, because it's a real sort of, it seems like it's a real personal story of someone going through that process. But you can. Oh, carry on.
I was just going to comment. I mean, absolutely. I think in my mind as you were talking that it places our expression, our Pentecostal expression, which I value and I know is a God thing, but it gives us a sense of place in a context for the expression of what God did with the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. It wasn't just, well, this is the real thing and everything is just an also ran. For that book particularly, what that introduced me to was writers from different eras. And I remember another preacher saying, for anybody aspiring in growing, in their thinking Christianity, read from authors from different centuries, not just from around your context. And he does that. He looks at some historical stuff. John Donne was a 16th century writer. Bede, a 16th century writer. I think that's right. It gives you a sense that there is a stream that God is up to with the gospel. And it didn't start in 1900. There was a ton of stuff that was happening, and that sense of place for our expression has a context to it.
I recently read Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. And it was obviously written in the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. But it's still quite a while away from where we are now. And Chesterton was Catholic, and but there's so much I think that every Christian can learn from those books. And so I think you're absolutely right. When you look back in history, there's so many amazing books and writers that we can read and learn from, and like you said with Philip Yancey here, he's gone back in history and he's looked at some of the great writers. Something I want to do more of. I think that's for sure.
Really helpful. It's also different context. So Dostoevsky features in is one of the references. I couldn't even pronounce it when I read it. I just had to read the letters and hope. But some of the things, some of the weight that he wrote under major oppression is just breathtaking, really. I wouldn't have called him a Pentecostal, but certainly called him a Christian.
I do have the audiobook of the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, and it's 37 hours long. I'm only about 8 hours into it.
Yeah,
it might take me a few more hours to a bit more investment. I have stopped for the last few months, and so maybe I need to pick it back up again. Brilliant. All right, that's Soul Survivor by Philip Yancey. Should we go on to your second resource?
Absolutely. So, Chris, I hope I'm not cheating on this. I think we just said before, but Debbie and I, we have a great marriage, and we've always invested in our marriage, and we believed. Sorry, for clarification, Debbie's my wife. Okay, just in case there's anything spurious out there. So, ministry, if you're married, particularly, you can't just substitute ministry, a good ministry, for bad marriage. Ministry, God has given my wife to me as my first responsibility, and me to her. So we believe that ministry comes out of a healthy relationship at home. So that's why my second resource is, and that's not the only one on this, but one that's I just can't put down. We'll revisit from time to time again. It's just the resources and the book by Mark Gungor. And he did a series of seminars, which he then put into a book called Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage. And I mean, the resources are great. You find them on YouTube. The book he goes deeper in his book, and I've found some things in there so helpful and so true. And Debbie and I, we visited that, we use that, and we use that material when we take marriage seminars together to make sure. And we've come out of that saying, when it comes to any couples, and certainly in ministry, you can have an okay marriage, you can just get by, but I do believe God's heart is he's giving us tools to give us great marriages all the time. Why can't we aspire to that? So we've aspired to that, and that's been a really helpful resource for us.
That's great. I would love to sort of dive into some of the things that Mark Gungor really talks about. Is there some things that really stood out for you that you've really sort of put into practice and things like that?
Yes. So the fun thing, which is actually quite viral on YouTube now, but just great. He talks about men's brains and women's brains. He does this whole enactment and talks about how things are very different in the way that men and women think. And And his little context for that is that men tend to think in a very compartmentalized way. He uses illustration of where men think in little boxes, and when they want to discuss a topic with anybody, they will go to that particular box. They will draw that box out, being very careful not to allow the size to touch any other box. They will open up the lid of that box, discuss what is in that box only. And when they have finished, they put that box back very, very carefully, and it's all done. See, then it goes on. And women's brains are very different. They are like a ball of wire that's connected to everything. And he says he describes it as the internet superhighway where everything is connected. And he says that that's why a woman can remember everything. And if you have an argument, she'll bring up things from years ago that have an impact and a bearing on how she may be feeling in a particular moment. I think that was such a humorous and yet illuminating thought. We are different, and we need to be aware of these things. But the other seminal thing for me that he outlines really well is very countercultural, and he talks about this aspiration that our society has these days. I think fueled by a Tom Cruise film. I'm just trying to remember the name of it now. It says, this idea that finding a partner, the one, is that you complete me. Goes into he says that is not Jewish thinking. It's not biblical thinking. It's actually old Greek. I'm trying to think of the right word here. Greek God thinking. And he says that finding the right one, and if you don't find the right one, then we have to have a right to sort of separate and go. So it's not about being the right one. It's not about finding the right one. It's about being the best person you can be into a relationship. And I read that because they're things we kind of know, but when he began to outline, that is a spear to an aspiration of current pop culture that people need to hear when they're struggling in their relationships. And so they're just there's loads of things. There are a couple of things that really stick out in my mind.
And I think when Gungor's picking up on that, the difference between the men's brains and women's brains. I mean, it's so we all recognize it as true, don't we? And I was thinking, it made me think about Genesis when God creates the woman, that the helpmate is what's the translation, but it's kind of Ezer Kenegdo is the Hebrew.
Yes. That's right.
And when you dive into that, it's the kind of Kenegdo is that word. It's kind of opposite or same but against. So so same but different, basically. And how so same in terms of humanity, different in terms of skill set. And and you're right, when you look at the brains of men and women, how actually what God has designed is for how they work together. And and so I think and seems like Gungor really picks up on this thread, and he's recognizing that actually when we appreciate we're wired very, very different, then there's there's a lot of stuff in there that we can actually benefit from. It seems like it.
I mean, just picking up on that, I mean, things I've learned on my journey, I realized how important early chapters of Genesis are as a blueprint for so many things about our faith. And so we talk about humanity right now. I mean, that thing, the same but opposite. The verse or the few verses before is God is saying, let us make man, humanity, in our image. And then so he makes Adam and then says, it's not good that he's alone. It's not that Adam was lonely. He doesn't say he was lonely. How could he be lonely? You've got God having a conversation every evening with him in the Garden of Eden. That's not the deal. It's the aloneness. He says that's not who we are, talking about the Godhead. And so he puts Adam to sleep and he draws out of Adam Eve. It's not makes another kind of human. He draws out the womanness of Adam and then brings them together and said that partnership completeness more adequately reflects how the Godhead functions. And that really, I found that's really helpful to understanding, why there are differences. And we go on the journey of trying to reconcile those differences for the entire length of a married life. That never changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in Protestant circles, Protestants have been known for their sort of strong work ethic, and and
Mm,
sometimes that we've seen throughout history that that's come at the detriment of marriage, and we've
yeah.
seen examples of that, and which is obviously always sad to read about and to hear about,
Mm,
and I think having this focus on healthy marriages is a really vital part. When you look into scripture, it's about Paul talks about looking after your household
yeah.
as a leader in the church, and so actually
Yeah.
like reclaiming those things that actually, and like you said, your first ministry is to your wife, and
Yeah.
so yeah, how does that work out for you in a practical sense? How do you make those decisions where you're busy, you've got lots of things on, but also you've got a marriage, and you've got there's a
Sure.
family as well. How do you sort of make those practical decisions that really help you for your marriage to be your primary ministry?
Sure, and I recognise that some things I'll say they'll be personality driven. We are who we are, and in some senses, honest conversations with couples have to work out through their types, their personality. We're Debbie and I are very deferential to one another. We recognise our responsibilities. Debbie's very honouring of what I do, and at the same time, I am deferential that she's my wife and serves and ministers with me. And we have worked things out. I think we worked things out in terms of pressures of time and ministry, which was validated actually by um, a teaching that I heard at the GLS, the Willow Creek GLS, when it's really caught me now. The guy from Hawaii came in. Gosh, it's caught me. I can't remember his name. I'll just tell you the teacher, and I'm sure Wayne Cordero.
Wayne
That's it,
Cordero,
Wayne
yeah.
Cordero. And he asks this very question in one of his lectures: how do we get balance? What does balance look like? And he uses the picture of if you like, a seesaw with a fulcrum. And he says we have weight on either end of the seesaw, and we think balance is we stand in the middle, and when we've got equal weight on either side, we can stand and it's balanced. And he says that image is not healthy, because the moment something goes slightly heavier on one side, we panic because there's going to be an imbalance in weight. And he says when that happens, it's not that we can't move. He sort of defines the fulcrum as our heart. He says there are times when to bring balance back, there are times when the fulcrum needs to move in the direction of the weight for a season. And then for a season, when that is sorted, the fulcrum moves back towards the center and we keep balance. And if there's weight on ministry, there are times in my life where Debbie has released me to actually minister, because the demands of ministry in that season requires that. But that's not a permanent state of affairs. I've got to recognize that it's seasonal and put some boundaries in place to come back to the middle. But equally, there are times in my existence, our family life, where our family, particularly when they were younger, required that attention. And so that meant that there are some things as a minister I had to say no to. Said, no, I'm not available for that. I put things in place, or I just don't book up the diary, or we have that conversation, an honest conversation, and Debbie can pull that card and say, I need you here, Nick. And she has that currency because we've had this moving fulcrum understanding sort of between us all the time. I hope that picture makes sense, Chris. But
No,
so
yeah,
I think,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's how and even today, we have similar, we have maybe different pressures in our life. Now we're at different seasons of ministry. We have 3 young grandchildren, and we're involved in their lives, and they live a bit further away than just downstairs or in their bedrooms. We've got to make the effort to do that. We will do that because we have this principle of we want to invest into our grandchildren. We want to see a healthy reflection of faith in what I think is going to be a challenging world for them. So we'll move the fulcrum either way.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that's Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage by Mark Gungor. Should we go on to your third resource?
Yeah. So I guess, so I've tried to pick things from different seasons of ministry for me. And my third resource is, actually, I've got to say, I've just completed a master's with Missio Dei. And I've been successful in gaining that, which has just blown me away. I'm so amped by that. And I would say, actually, This is a maturing thing in me, but that disciplined study and what it's exposed me to as has helped me in my teaching and preaching and appreciation of of the weight of knowledge within our Christian context that I think it's important for leaders to access. Um, it's just I went in. I didn't gain a degree, an undergrad degree. I never felt, because I was called to ministry fairly early on. I never felt released to go and study. It was a different season then. The world is a different place now. But so I never pursued that. I did other short courses which have really helped me. I've invested in a library to help me, but never felt released to go and actually do the formal discipline of a degreed study. And then lockdown came because lots of people's thinking shifted a bit, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this. I felt it was the right time, and so I invested into that, and that has, I mean, people even on Sunday, I mean, it's on Sunday, and people have commented and said, Nick, just your teaching preaching game, you've gone up another level. It's really helping us. So I'd say that's a very important tool for me that I've been grateful for.
Yeah, great. Well, this is a great time for me to sort of learn from you, because I've just started my master's with Missio Dei, doing the same one as you, practical theology. So, what do you think has been? How do you think it's sharpened up your theological knowledge, but also how sharpened up your preaching as well?
Yeah, I think just the integrity of where my sources are, the importance of sources. It's not that I didn't appreciate that. I think when you go into a formal scholarly context, it opens up a library that you can, which you learn to use. So resources because it's more and more online. Back in the day, it would have been just loads of books in the library. So I'm grateful that I've been able to access a little bit easier. Just making sure that sources have integrity to them, and there's so much out there on the net that's spurious. So, if you're drawing down resource to research topics now, you have to be really careful. And I think in terms of my research, having a critical eye on what I am reading, what I'm drawing from, I think, helping to put some really healthy structure. I have to say, when it comes to my preaching and teaching style, I tend not to be expositional. I'm much more. I want to. My big thing, Chris, is when I teach and share, I want to take biblical truth and sometimes maybe complex biblical understanding, but anchor that into real life context, so people go, "Aha, I get that." That's the big joy for me. I remember years ago when AoG did the gym campaign, which was probably about 20 years before you were born. Sorry about that. But and there was J. John was speaking, this new up and coming preacher from the Anglican Church, came in, and his testimony was he'd listen to guys that were preaching and he'd write some notes in his some letters in his margin, YBH, YBH, YBH. And a friend looked across and said, "What's those letters, YBH?" He said, "Great teaching, but yes, but how? Yes, but how?" And I never forgotten that phrase. I think that's influenced me. So when it comes to my preaching, I want biblical integrity, because the Bible is just a brilliant, brilliant book, and it is incredibly relevant for us. But I think the job of teachers and preachers to say, this is where it connects with real life. And I think even doing the studies that we've done, it's practical theology. I think the clue's in the title right there. How are we engaging our theological understanding with integrity that has a practice that people go, aha, that's how I can live my life? That's massive to me, Chris. And I think it's not that I didn't do that before. I think doing my MA has just lifted my game on that, giving me a much wider resource, and it's made me think more deeply. I realise you've got to spin your thinking up, because when you do that's when you realise you're deeper than you thought you were, and that's helpful when you communicate truth.
Yeah, I've certainly found that interacting with scholars in what they're thinking around maybe a specific passage or a specific subject has been really helpful, because you get the breadth of understanding, and then this is the point of what a master's is supposed to do, is force you to think, well, what do you think?
Exactly.
Because there's all these ranges of opinions on, say, take any passage in the Bible, there'll be a range of opinions about what does it mean, and then what does it mean for us today, and then you've got to wade through that and go, but what do I think on that? And you've got to use your sort of critical faculties to be able to go, well, I think this makes the most sense because of these factors. And so it really hones and really forces you to really wrestle with it and go, well, what do I think? What do I think that this passage is trying to say? And then what does that mean for us today? And that's where it kind of links, like you said, into ministry. And I love the idea of it. The practical theology part of it is that it's practical. It's starting with, well, what are the situations and life circumstances that people are in? How can we use how can we use theological reflection to then really think through those things and actually go, it's not just about, the Bible says this, but it has no interaction with our real life. But actually, we all go through things, but we can reflect on that theologically and then come to it from a much more holistic biblical worldview, so that we can put that into practice in our lives. And so I love it. So I'm only early in, so I'm going to probably just have to I have to kind of get all your notes. And
you are more than welcome. Seriously, I think that's important, though, Chris. It is your thinking, and you've got to work that through. But we're not meant to be islands in some of this stuff. I think some of my feedback, because I started off my MA in lockdown, and just by circumstance, it meant that being able to gather together was limited. We did a lot of stuff online. There was a lot of emphasis on being aware of plagiarism, and I know that's a college thing. So if you're on your own, you can live a little bit scared, and you get a little bit scared about how much, can I think, can I check, can I talk with other people on the course? But I do think a lot of our critical thinking as Christians, it needs to be done with the backwards and forwards. That is certainly the Hebrew model. The Jewish leaders, the whole Mishnah was out of debate, and so being able to think this through and engage with ideas, we shouldn't be afraid of doing that. So I encourage you, make that a part of your study.
Yeah, great, brilliant. Well, that's the three resources. So we've got resource one is Soul Survivor by Philip Yancey. Resource two is Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage by Mark Gungor, and resource three is a Masters in Practical Theology with Missio Dei.
Absolutely.
All enjoyed with an apple Betty with custard that sticks to your lips. I think that sounds great to me.
Mate, sounds great to me when you put it like that. Thank you. Yeah, really enjoy it.
Nick, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been brilliant to chat with you and to get your heart on things. And I'm sure we'll have another podcast on this soon. So
I would love it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.